Alright, so I've played a game recently called Suhoshin. It's a solid, simple visual novel. If you're not familiar with what that is, think a book with lots of pictures. Which also means that vast majority of people will probably not be into it. I definitely wouldn't say that there is anything great here, anything that would change anyone's mind about visual novels, but it's still fairly high quality, well done, linear, somewhat simple story. There are a handful of endings, but not much, and, well, only one true ending. So, well, I still would recommend it, but it's just not very amazing. What is it about? A young man, an orphan from a small South Korean village, doesn't have many prospects in life. However, through patronage of a wealthy man, Yuri is offered a chance to seize his dreams and step toward a better future. Years later he returns, finishing his arduous training and a difficult exam, becoming a government official, only to witness a bizarre string of murders shaking his little hometown. Now, he's tasked with unraveling the mystery and finding the bloodthirsty killer. What did I like? The characters. I have definitely seen lazier writing when it comes to the characters, and this is done well enough. When a certain character is gone and the main character is shook up, I had tears welling in my eyes. Perhaps I'm just a crybaby, but it just means that the writer must be doing something right to elicit such strong emotions from me. The killings themselves were always a shock, considering how peaceful the world, the village, and especially the music are. There are a few simple songs, but they add to the slow, mundane feel of the story, which again makes the contrast more striking. Although I must admit, I expected a much more sinister twist, or perhaps a complete opposite in the true end. Aside from that, I found it mildly interesting to see the Korean terminology. I specifically avoided in the description and this video, but to make it less confusing, but I am always curious about the little quirks of language and culture, and this was definitely not something I would have known otherwise. The game also offered minor glimpses into folklore, which surprised me, as it's extremely similar to Japan. The two obviously had some history, but the commonalities aren't spelled out usually, so again, interesting to hear. Barring that, I did enjoy the mystery, despite being a little disappointed with the culprit. I would go into spoilers, but this would ruin the entire thing, so I'll just say that I would have liked it more if there were more clues early on. What did I dislike? Honestly, not much. Length is always one I complain about. This is the kind of game which doesn't really have replay value, so you'd expect it to be lengthy, or have some reason to redo certain segments like Zero Escape, for example. Here I definitely wouldn't say there is anything to redo to try and pick up some subtlety or see something new after a hidden trigger happened. There's none of that. True ending does have some hidden stuff to it, but that's just a minor part of the story. Just a bit more sappy change to the original ending. The culprit is another thing I dislike, but I already mentioned that. And also very minor, but there were a few misspellings, like your instead of you are, want with an apostrophe and want with an A, that sort of thing. It didn't ruin anything, but made the game look a little less put together. So overall, I don't think it's a huge deal which is gonna shatter the foundation of our perception of reality as we know it, but I enjoyed Suhoshin, and I think it was sweet, it had mystery, murder mystery especially, and it was a bit of a glimpse into the history and folklore of a country I don't know much about, Korea. So it's very much worthy of praise. Now, that's the recommendation. Now comes the spoiler talk. So, if you haven't played, just don't listen to the rest of it. This isn't part of a recommendation, but I just wanted to share this particular problem. So the story is, first of all, about memory sharing between different timelines. This is surprisingly common for visual novels, and it was revolutionary at first, but becomes a bit of a cop-out for writing as the time goes on. I feel like it would have been more interesting if shared memory was a thing, but the events would change, and what's especially interesting is if the killer wouldn't strike, and instead something else entirely would happen. The thing which started it all is daughter of the official walking into the forest, to be replaced by a shapeshifter. What if she was robbed and killed in the night by one of the villagers due to the main character's mingling? What if there was an actual serial killer working at the same time? What if, and bear with me here, the main character was the killer? I was very, very suspicious of the entire story being kickstarted as he came in. Suddenly a soldier boy walks into the village and the killing is start. Doesn't take a Kudo Shinichi to put two and two together. If there was something possessing him, or hell, even him doing it knowingly, I'd like the mystery a lot more. Or there could be always an angle that it's a good old Jan Bok was the killer. Make up some sort of story that his lover was a foreigner who wandered in and fell in love with him in those 3 years Yuri was gone. Then the lady was facing racism on a regular basis, and eventually the entire village scorned her except for Yun Bok. She would take her own life, and he would never forgive them. But he would still play the role of a diligent guard. But the Yuri arrival would be the trigger for his killing spree to begin. And it would be a fight to prove his innocence, all the while the evidence would point to the player. But that's what I'd like to see changed in the story. I've had another problem entirely. The killer is a shapeshifting nine-tailed fox. She lived for a long time somewhere else, but one day she fell in love with a man and even married him. The two were living happily and it was going fine until someone found out and revealed her secret to the husband. He couldn't take it and took his own life, while the fox had a witch hunt called on her. She was the one blamed for it. She escaped, and ever since she was seeking vengeance against the family of the people who were responsible for telling the husband. Which is exactly what she does. Now, I don't want to sound like a devil's advocate, but doesn't she deserve something? Some payback? Like, she had a happy life. I'm not saying serial killing is excusable, but I can't help but feel awful for her. So much so that I was hoping there'd be a way to end up together with her. Basically prevent any killings, say fuck you to everyone, and confess to a fox that I want nothing more than to help her. There would be reluctance, of course, and she would try something stupid and violent, but she'd agree, eventually. And yet it doesn't seem like there's any option of that. It's depressing. Reminds me of Grimm's fairy tales. The original ones were horribly dark and morbid. And here it's a bit more lighthearted, but again, she's a monster and a killer. So let's butcher her and walk into the sunset. Screw that! She deserves redemption! So these are my problems. Maybe another one. The game could have been longer if there was some sort of better written mystery. And I don't mean it the same way I've already said. I mean, there could have been more complicated investigation, longer dialogue and unraveling of threads. With flashbacks to the training and in the capital. Sprinkle in. By the sounds of it, that was actually a pretty interesting time. He described the serial killer case, and it would have been a lot more interesting as a flashback instead of a short recollection. It would have been a lot more interesting if those moments in the capital were linked to the current situation in the village. Okay, now that's all I got.